Hello and welcome. We're live once again with Innovation Exchange. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all here in this new interview that we have. And today is a very special friend of mine that I'll be interviewing, Chris Wheeldon, who is based in Canada. And we first met back in Toronto, right, Chris? I think so,
I
during
think
the
so.
workshop. Yeah, and Thomas was there also, right? Thomas Weddell.
Yep.
Okay, so for those of you guys who don't know Thomas Weddell, he's a very famous innovation writer, and he was there during the workshop with us. And then myself and Chris, we stayed like in touch for a bit of while because we had so much connection with this all this innovation methodologies and all this. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Chris. And for those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Harold Schultz Neto. I'm from originally from Brazil. I work with innovation for like 6 or 7 years now, and I had the opportunity to work like globally with innovation, over 100 projects that we have done in all areas, from like digital transformation, UX design. I even built the other day, Chris. How could we build like new? How do you say those power towers? You know, for electric power.
Yep. Yep.
You know, the huge
The high
ones.
the high voltage distribution towers. Yeah.
Yes, high voltage distribution towers
Yep.
for the Andes, which is like a very famous mountain here in South America. So
Oh yeah.
e- even that has gone through my portfolio. So it's a pleasure to be talking to you guys. I'm the CEO of Metanoia Digital. Metanoia stands for changing one's mind in Old Greek. So the idea is to change your mind towards digital, because digital is such a powerful revolution that we're living in. And here we are with Chris. And Chris, we met with innovation, and Chris was already a guy from innovation, right, Chris? When we met, you were already doing like workshops and methodologies and all this.
Yep.
And it's a pleasure. Thank you to be here today with us. And free feel free to introduce yourself and say hello to the audience.
Sure. Thanks, Harold. Yeah. So it's first of all, it's really great to be here. It's really awesome to be chatting with you again. As Harold mentioned, we probably met 6 years ago. When I
Four,
when I don't
four.
know.
I think 4. Yeah, probably
It's
4.
been a while.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was at Cisco at the time. I was part of their innovation center in Toronto. Um, and we were doing a lot of work with service design and design sprints, and trying to introduce that methodology into a kind of an old school organization in some ways. I mean, wanting to do things the old-fashioned way. So it was a really interesting time, and trying to engage with customers and do a lot of different things from the sort of the usual build it first and figure out how you're going to sell it later. We were more interested in, let's understand what the customer's trying to do. So I left Cisco, and I hooked up with ET Group, who had actually done which is an AV integration company here in Toronto, audiovisual, do a lot of corporate work, a lot of enterprise scale work. So it's not just, you know, simple digital displays and stuff like that. We get into some pretty sophisticated stuff. But one of the things that we would do that's really interesting, that really attracted me, because it's, that industry didn't appeal to me from any other perspective, but they were looking to do a lot of stuff with innovation, trying to do more with customer engagement, collaborating with customers, working in a much more strategic but also a vulnerable way too. Kind of opening up to the customers and listening and responding to what we were hearing, and that really appealed to me. And the opportunity to help build some of that, bring some of the stuff that I'd learned from Cisco and from previous work, and really make that part of this unique organization's work.
Okay, that's great, Chris. Let's kind of help our audience here. When you say AV integration and being able to work with customer closely, etc. Can you bring us some like use cases? Because when I think AV, I mostly think like a home theater
Yeah.
system, a home cinema system.
Well,
But then we have like security cameras and stuff like that. I
yeah,
don't
we
know.
don't tend to get into that
We,
side of things too much.
yeah,
But
yeah.
let me give you an example of a customer where we've worked with them. In fact, my first engagement, they kind of threw me into the deep end almost right away. About 3 weeks after I initially had a chat with them, they said, "We want you to co-lead this innovation workshop we're doing with this customer, which is
Wow.
a major Canadian pension fund, and they've got a lot of old boardroom technology that they're really struggling with,
Mm,
and they need a strategy." Um, so we did an innovation lab for them here in Toronto. We did another one in Hong Kong. We did another one in London because we wanted to get international perspectives. And we built a strategy for them that said, this is what you've got. These are all the problems that we heard. Everything from every room we go into has a different control panel. Now imagine if every light switch in your house had to be operated a different way. And this is 100 meeting rooms across the organization. They all work differently. People didn't know
wow.
what they were getting into. They were afraid to touch technology. So we had people who were actually afraid of using the technology in any way beyond pushing the on button because they didn't know what was going to happen. So we wanted to work with them and simplify what they were working with and make it like a consumer product.
Of
So
course.
very simple to use, very unintimidating, and get rid of all the old stuff. So when we're talking about audio because audio is super important. I mean, one of the things that you and I did when we got on this call is how are we each receiving the other. If you don't have good audio, then the rest of your meeting is kind of garbage. It doesn't matter how well you can see the
Exactly.
person or see their display, see their shared content. But video is important too. So they had old displays and projectors, and when you have a projector, the light bulb's going to go right in the middle of an important meeting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they wanted to get rid of all that. So bringing all the stuff to the table so the cables are all concealed, making sure you got the latest codecs. They're a Cisco shop, so we put in a lot of Cisco technology, um, and just making it look really good and really professional, and really work well, and providing them with good design so they could work with their other contractors because some of this involved other work as well. So it's a big project, and we've been working with them on doing refreshes of their technology for the last 3.5 years, as I said.
So sometimes it goes like we take it for granted, us who use it. But who here in the audience has never been to a meeting room and then I don't know you connect your HDMI cable and it doesn't work, it doesn't show on the screen, and you're just in a meeting, it was working, and then another person connected their laptop and it doesn't work, and then you don't have connection. It's
Yeah,
so boring, right? And especially now with the pandemics, it became so much more important that all the audio and video stuff works well, right?
yeah,
So we can
yeah,
actually make decisions, and that's really cool because Chris was the first person that I ever met that introduced me to the jobs to be done theory, and it was so cool because sometimes you just think, oh, it's just another boring meeting, but actually you're looking to make decisions, understand data, make decisions. That's the job that is behind a good boarding room, a good
yeah.
meeting room and all this, right, Chris?
Absolutely. Yeah. And actually we still use that jobs to be done mindset when we first start talking to a client. In fact, one of the things, if I'm sitting in on a sales meeting and the sales lead is talking to the client, I'm listening for what is it they're trying to accomplish. What are they struggling with? Because those are two really key things. And sometimes it's technology, and sometimes it's culture. Sometimes it's practice. Sometimes it's just the way they're used to doing things, and we can help a lot with from the technology side of things. We can't fix their culture, obviously. that's a little bigger than us. But
Do
you
you
know,
do you kind of like design interfaces for them,
yep.
or are just like AV systems, and you just put the pieces together, or you
No,
really design?
we have people on the team who are UX designers,
Oh,
because
cool.
yeah, because sometimes you need an interface that's custom to what you're trying to do, and it needs to be simple, and but it still needs to do all the things that you need it to do, right?
Yeah.
So whether that's muting all the mics in the room or what have you. So it's very subtle, because there's a lot of stuff you can do, and you can make a real mess of it.
Yeah, I was in the other day in a shop, and they were like all Alexa connected. Is Alexa turn on the system, and Alexa do this, and turn on the popcorn and all this stuff. So
Yeah.
it's quite amazing the level that we're getting with technology. And how this can help. Actually, the other day I was like roaming around the TV, and it was showing an old movie with Sylvester Stallone called The
Oh yeah.
Demolition Man.
Oh
I
yeah.
don't know if you ever seen this
Heard
one
of
with,
it? Haven't seen it.
yeah, with Wesley Snipes, and
Yeah.
it goes like this. He was from the police, and Wesley Snipes was like a bandit, and both they were both like cryogenically frozen for several years, like I don't know, 30, 50 years, and they came back, and the world was like 2030 something, and
Yeah.
everything was changed. The cars were all electric and autonomous and all this. But then it shows a company, and the guys were in a meeting room, and all the chairs, they were actually like small LCD displays with people inside the screens, and they were doing like an online meeting.
Oh
And
yeah.
back then, the movies from like I don't know, '94. Back then, it was something like, wow, this is so impressive, right? And nowadays, it's like, look what we are doing here, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. No, it's predicting the future is very difficult.
Exactly, exactly. And do you guys do anything with I don't know, like computer vision, or all this new advanced technologies that are coming by? And
We don't too much. We tend to work because we're working a lot with enterprises. They're usually more interested in making sure it works and it's reliable and it's
Mhm.
easy to use versus being cutting edge. So, and most of
Okay,
the people who want cutting edge stuff don't come to companies like us. They just build the stuff. They just
okay,
slap it up on a wall and play with it, and then take it down 2 weeks later and try something different. So, it's a different use case from what we do.
okay,
So,
okay. Cool. So I was in a conference one day from a company from Silicon Valley, and they couldn't. They started the webinar, and it got down, so everybody was like off the platform, then back to the platform, and it went down 3 times during the
wow.
call, 3 times, and they were like, whoa, what is happening with our supplier, with our with the company that sources us this kind of solution. And someone mentioned in the comments, AI is easy, AV is hard, because
It's
so,
true.
yeah,
It's very
sometimes it's
true.
easier to make our artificial intelligence
Yeah.
talk than an audio video system to work, and it's
Well,
so
it's
basic.
it's true, because one of the things that happens when you have an audio video system is you're going from the real world into the digital world. And
Exactly, you have this transition.
that
Yeah,
crossover is hard, and it's a chain of things that can break. And it's there's still a little bit of art in there. I mean, speaker design and microphone design. I mean, there's a lot of science, no question, but it's those things are all physical,
yeah,
and
yeah,
they're subject to the vagaries of the physical world. you know
yeah.
just like all of us are discovering with you know working from home and hearing dump trucks in the background and doorbells and being cat bombed and having spouses wander through. I mean, we can't control the physical world.
Of
It
course.
is what it is.
Yeah.
So the AV systems are trying to catch up, and there's actually a lot of AI going into those systems. The manufacturers are building that in for things like noise control and picking out who's talking and focusing on them. And there's a lot of tech that's sort of quietly happening, and you don't really notice it because it's so subtle. But
Yeah.
we've been the beneficiary of that over the last year with Microsoft Teams and Zoom and Cisco WebEx, all in a desperate race to be the best platform.
Yeah, but that's something you mentioned that for me is really important, is that all those tools, and I don't know, artificial intelligence, whatever, they're like they must be like a subtle way of improving customer experience, because that's actually the goal that every company needs to have right now, is to improve customer experience. That will bring more sales, whatever. And in the end, what you want to do is to have like the less friction during the customer journey,
Yeah.
and when you manage to add features like this, I don't know, an artificial intelligence system, something. I remember back then there were like these systems, those Cisco systems, that the camera was like turning for people, and it was so smart. You look at it, whoa, that is something cool. But it's so subtle. For the user, he doesn't even care, what kind of technology goes in there. And
Yeah.
that's kind of like a mindset shift that I think most companies need to have, is that sometimes companies are so focused on the technology itself. You mentioned Cisco in the beginning. We build products for them try to sell, but actually the customer doesn't care. He wants his end-to-end experience to work flawlessly, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And that's key. Is it's the what is important, but the why is even more important. Understanding the why and the what it is they're trying to do. That's the important part,
Yeah.
versus what the blinky light boxes are. So,
Cool. Cool. So tell me, you've been working with innovation. You mentioned that you still work with the jobs to be done concept and all this. So
mhm.
how does your workshops work? I don't know if you do like co-creation workshops with customer, or is more like internal thing that you do. Are you mostly focused on like which kind of methodologies to use in each use case? How are you dealing with that?
It's actually reasonably consistent. We've built over the last few years, kind of a standardized approach. Now, obviously, it gets tweaked a little bit for each customer, but typically we start off with an ethnographic approach. Once we engage, I mean, obviously, there's always a little bit of, what do you need, what are you trying to do, up to a proposal. We do, and once we actually start the engagement, we start doing with interviews. We talk to senior managers to get a sense of sort of what's your overall direction, what are you looking for strategically, what are your key priorities, that kind of thing. And but then we take it out to the field, because we want to talk to individual departments, individual users, because individual teams have their own uses, have their own needs, and they will tell you things that senior managers don't know about. I mentioned that with this one client, we went to Hong Kong and London, and one of the reasons we did that is because Toronto's the mothership. It's the headquarters, which means that the rest of the world kind of gets forgotten. Because
Oh,
they're
yeah.
branch offices. They're important, but they're also, they're a secondary thought. So when we went there and listened to them, first of all, they told us, "Hey, nobody's ever asked us these questions before. Nobody's ever
Wow.
said, 'Hey, how are you dealing with your technology?'" And second of all, they gave us an earful of information. So
Wow.
the purpose of those sessions, I mean, part of it was about listening, but part of it was, okay, help us to build let's build together what your future looks like. Not in terms of, boxes and wires and displays and so on, but more of what's your experience? What's your ideal experience? What does it look like? What happens at the beginning of your day? What is it like when you're working on a meeting, when you're collaborating with a partner, uh, when you're collaborating with somebody outside, which is always a little more challenging because you've got different systems meeting then. So they were, that we brought people into those sessions, and these are people from across the organization. I mean, they were from top to bottom, and across the organization. We had managing directors in there, and we had like analysts. In fact, we had one guy who was at the London session, and then he came to the Hong Kong session because he transferred. He enjoyed it so much the first time, he decided to come again. Um, so,
That's
so
funny.
what we got out of that, I mean, what we got out of that was a tremendous sense of this is what is important for us, and that's what's important out of the co-creation piece is to understand what does your ideal experience look like, and then we can design the technology because we're experts in understanding the technology, but they're experts in understanding what their business needs are and what the problems are that they're struggling with. So we can only bring solutions that address those. So one of those was, hey, we got to standardize your user interface on all these rooms because it's all different, and we need to replace this particular form of technology because it's causing a problem. And these are the things that we need to focus on first. So huddle spaces turned out to be really important for them because they were doing a lot more small team meetings, like inter-team, as opposed to large group-to-group sessions or even large in-house sessions. So, really listening and getting a sense of, okay, how do you actually work? Really helped us to understand what the technology was that needed to support that.
Well, that's pretty interesting because it goes completely in line with what Leandro told us in the last show that we had, and he was like, across the board nowadays at Cisco, we are like customer focused, and what you're telling me is like being customer focused, and there are some companies that do that like based on data, as I mentioned in the previous show. You don't have to actually have like an empty map canvas. You need to have the customer needs, whatever the way you feel more comfortable doing it, and whatever the way you find data about it. I believe that's the key point, and that's exactly what you're bringing on. And then how do you go from like understanding them to actually creating the solution, and who is part of those teams? I think that's something important because, as you mentioned, you have like UX designers, but you also might have like people from the technology itself. Some integrator with speaker, the other one with video, what's etc. The other one with broadcasting system and all this.
Yeah. So a typical integration approach has what's called a technology advisor, and they're kind of they're there to listen to the customer and kind of take into themselves to sort of incorporate the customer needs into their understanding of what's required, and then they will give guidance to a designer
Okay.
to say you need to design a system that does X, Y, and Z. And you should be using this technology because based on all the things that I heard, these are the things that that they're ready for, that they need, that fit their budget and their environment, and the use cases that they've described to us. And then the AV designer goes and they do the deep dive into, how big does the display have to be, and what audio, we're going to use a DSP or we're going to rely on the codec to do that. Does it have a codec? Is it using a soft codec? What are the switching and devices that are required? All those niggly details that go into building that bill of material and that all those drawings. We have a CAD team that puts together a stack of drawings, and then it's
Cool.
ready for installation. Then we procure, and then we do the installation. And then at the end of it, we do a test and verify to the client that these are all the things you asked for, and it all works. That design and build part of the cycle is pretty standard. So most AV designers will do that.
Okay.
Or most AV integrators will do all that.
Okay.
So,
and where's like the Chris advantage? Where does your work really appears that makes it like a differentiator for
well, I'm
each?
not a specialist, so I stick my fingers in all the pies.
Okay, cool.
so right now so for example, I design and run the workshops. So if we're
Okay.
doing a workshop, I will work on the design of it. I'll lead the design of that, and we'll bring in unique elements. We'll do pre-material, but there's a lot of, sort of legwork to get the questions. I'll do the interviews,
Yeah.
but
Oh,
bring
cool.
in somebody from the technical side, but I'll do the ethnographic interviews, and I lead those. So I lead a lot of that front end stuff, and then here you go. Here's all the stuff we heard. Now it's your turn to go and build it into an actual solution.
Okay.
So there's an engineering company we're working with now. These guys are seriously old school. You were talking 1994, 95. These guys are stuck in like 1984. It was really amazing, and they had technology problems galore. Um, but one of the things we heard from them, because we interviewed a lot of people, is they were spending a lot of time traveling because they were finding it difficult to hold people accountable when they were on an audio call, because they couldn't see the other person, and so they had no idea whether the person at the end of the call, which was at a manufacturing plant in Saskatchewan or something like that, they couldn't tell whether the person was engaged, whether they had other people coming and going, and so they wasted a lot of time and a lot of money traveling
Wow.
because they couldn't get the connection that they needed. And that was one of the things that came out of the conversations and the observations that we did, to say, hey, this is a really important point, that you need to start thinking about video and not just audio. So when
Wow.
they, originally they just wanted to do their head office, and then they realized by the time we finished, just the first part of the engagement, nope, we got to do all the plants as well, all 10 plants, so that they had that connection. So
Wow. That's first. It's crazy to hear that there are companies that are still in this level in 2021, right? But
yeah, but this
secondly,
was 2019, so this
yeah,
was
okay, so
pre-COVID. This
yeah,
is before all
pre-COVID,
this stuff
exactly.
happened. So yeah, it's and with the pension fund client that I was talking about, I mean, right now I'm working on, so we have, sales, design, delivery, and service. We do the whole end to end. I'm currently involved in every step of that with this one client. So we're doing a large service contract with them right now. I'm writing the service document. I'm and I'm having regular calls with the client. Um, I'm sorting out managing the design conversation in terms of mostly in terms of the scheduling and making sure we hit our targets and stuff like that. It's a lot of coordination,
Mhm.
but it's just, and it's listening to the client. It's listening to the client, asking,
Exactly.
what's important. What's
Yeah.
important to you?
When you were explaining, I was thinking, how important is this ethnographical piece? That many companies they kind of like overlook, but it's so important. And the worst for me is not even overlooking, but it's saying like, let's hire some UX designer and they'll do the stuff, but nobody from, I don't know, top level management, etc., has access to what has been worked on. And designers try to do something, but they don't have like access or budget or anything, because people don't see the value. But as you mentioned, this is so impactful, right? To work on this ethnographical piece right from the beginning, and to
Very
actually,
much so.
one of the biggest complaints or struggles that I see companies going through the digital transformation process, is that they say, you know what, we have like the customer journey mapped out, so we have several different channels where we connect to the customer, and then he gets a call from our CRM department, that makes relationship, and those leads go through a funnel, etc., etc. And I'm like, no, 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 wait, that's not the customer journey. That's your journey to sell something,
Yeah.
and that's one of the biggest confusions that I see. And when you have this ethnographical piece well done, you can actually see like the touch points, the experience, the journey, the moments, that the jobs to be done in each moment, etc., from the customer perspective, and then you come out with like what you can do inside that journey, and I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. As you said, it has to be there every step of the way. You have to ask questions and listen sincerely to the answers,
Exactly.
because you're going to learn something. There's going to be, and after a while, the customer starts sharing stuff with you that initially they might not have, and you start hearing things that it's like, oh, okay, now I understand, and you can get deeper and deeper with them, and you can provide more and more value all the time.
Great, great. Now you mentioned that you work like across the board, from end to end, like
Mm-hmm.
sales, delivery, etc. But you also mentioned to me prior to this conversation that you guys are working on like a self-organized culture and organization. How does that work? Who says what Chris needs to do, or how Chris says to other guys what they need to do? How is it looks such a paradigm shift, from people that are used to like hierarchy, and bosses and several levels of bosses. how,
Yeah,
how
yeah.
how does it work?
Well, it kind of works the way things work when you're not at work. So imagine this. Imagine you're going
That's
to
interesting.
imagine you're going to organize a party with all of your friends,
Okay.
right? So you might say, I think I'm going to come up with a menu, but I'm going to talk to you three other people, and let's figure out the menu together. And then who wants to do who's gonna pick out where we're going to hold this? Okay, you two. Okay, great, awesome. And so human beings are naturally self-organizing. And yeah,
Mm.
there's conflicts and there's struggle, but we naturally form into self-organizing teams according to what we do well, and we shy away from things that we don't do well. And sometimes you have to do some stuff that you don't want to do, but that's the way it is. So the way our organization is built is around that kind of natural organizational design, that instinctive design. So each of us comes in with different gifts. We have people who are excellent project managers. We have people who can write. We have people who can design. We have people who can install things. Um, and those gifts are multifaceted. And so everybody has sort of a home role, but we also have the flexibility to energize other roles in the organization when we see they need to be done. We have the ability to say, hey, I think this is a real role that's a permanent role. It's not just we needed to do this one time. This is an ongoing thing. Let's create a new role for this. And we have a structure for that. We call it governance. And anybody can bring forward a proposal to add a role, to change a role, whether to create a new team, to
Wow.
destroy a team, to change the purpose of a team, change the purpose of a role, whatever. We all have that ability. We don't have to wait for our boss to do it because we don't have a boss.
Wow.
Um, which means, we have to use different ways of doing things. So decision making is different, for example. Interpersonal conflict is different.
How do
Um,
you solve that?
you have to be adults and talk to each other and listen.
That's good. Yeah, good point.
Um, quite honestly, that's probably one of the areas that's hardest, because most of us don't learn to do that anyway. I mean, in a corporate
Anyway,
environment, most of us learn, if you have a problem with your coworker, you go to your boss and let him or her sort it out.
exactly.
But in this organization, you're essentially, in this kind of an organization, you're talking about two adults who have to sit down and listen to each other and give honest feedback. And that's probably the hardest part about this is giving honest feedback to one another and listening to that feedback and being grateful for the feedback and saying, okay, uh, how how can I put value on this? How can I really take this to heart and use it to change my perspective, change my approach. But sincerely, it's coming back to the customer thing. Sincerely listen, and since taking it in the spirit that it's offered, as opposed to kind of pushing it off. So that's a super important piece, is being able to give feedback and being able to receive feedback.
That sounds amazing for me. There's one guy that I really enjoy him. His like his whole leadership approach and all this, and he's a very famous radio show from the US called Dave Ramsey, and he has like a famous book on like personal finance and all this. And he says that in his organization, he has a uh, zero go zero tolerance over gossip. You know,
Mm,
and the way he understands gossip is like whenever you're talking about somebody with somebody else and that person is not in your presence, you know. And the way to solve that, he says, you know, is to bring the other person on, and you know, and you talk directly to her, you
yep.
know, to this person. And what you're telling me is basically like, you know, that's like our common stuff inside your own organization, right? There's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
zero
The,
gossip. Am I going to
well,
gossip with who?
the model we
What is
use
the
is
point?
actually the radical candor methodology that Kim Scott developed when she was at, I think, Google.
Oh, cool.
And it's about challenging directly, but um, being caring when you're giving that, as opposed to delivering directly without caring. And it's the doing it with caring part that's the hard part, because most of us are used to giving feedback in a very abrupt way because it's we're not used to doing so. But if you can give it, the trick is to give it in a kind way, and use kindness, and so you're seeing the other person, you're seeing the value of the other person, you're making them feel valued. So when they come away, they feel that they still feel valued. They still feel that they still feel cared for. So
Cool. So there's a comment here from Rodrigo, who used to be my student, and he mentions, I figure out how us Latins could do that kind of thing, you know, because Latins, we're very passionate and we're very gossipers, you know.
sure, yeah.
So it's really complicated, and that was something else that I learned during my tenure in the US, is to be hard with the problems and soft with the people. That was mostly like the slang that we used to use in the work I was doing, you know. And here in Brazil, we have a hard time like trying to separate those things, you know. Is he being harsh with me or the problem? But
Hmm.
actually, in Brazil, most people don't know this phrase, so they're actually being rude with the people. And you're
Yeah.
actually saying, you know, what you're talking about the radical candor, which I just add the link here on the comments, is exactly that. You know, be hard with the problem. You know, inside companies we have problems. We need to solve those problems so the company can thrive, and you know, people will be there.
Hmm.
There's nothing you can do. You know,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
once in a while someone gets fired, whatever, but people are there, you know, and you need to cooperate. I think that's the key element that you're
Absolutely.
talking about. But
Yeah.
you have like a management like playbook to do so. I remember you mentioned holacracy and all this. How does
There,
that work?
yeah, there are different call it operating systems.
Okay.
Holacracy is a different kind of operating system for an organization. There's a couple others as well. We use a modified version of Holacracy. You might call it Holacracy Light, because full on Holacracy is actually pretty intense, and
Yeah,
we have a
it's like
lot of
Scrum.
people.
You know, nobody implements the Scrum like by the book, right?
Or PM BOK, the PM Project
Exactly.
Management Book of Knowledge. Nobody uses all of that stuff.
Nobody. Yeah.
But it essentially relies on the idea that um, you have uh, this interlocking, and there's a hierarchy, but it's not a power hierarchy. So if you think about a cell in the body, think of a brain cell. So the brain cell does its thing, and the brain cell is part of a neuron, and the neuron does its thing. And then the neuron is a part of, a lobe of the brain, and the lobe of the brain is a part of the brain, and the brain is a part of the body. Now, can you say that any part of that has any more power or any more importance than any other part? Because the brain won't work if the body isn't there, And the body doesn't work if the heart's not there, and if it doesn't have the brain to tell it how to work. So all the parts have to work together. And so you recognize that, even at an individual cell level, at an individual person level, they have a role to play, and they have, that role has to provide value in the organization. And then the team that they're part of provides value, and it has a certain purpose. And then the organization has a purpose as well. And that purpose is not always driven by an individual. Sometimes it's driven, it kind of emerges. It emerges from the interaction with that organization with the world. I mean, one of the things that Holacracy, the principles, is that the organization is kind of like a living entity. It's a complex self-organizing structure. And so it's full of all these other complex self-organizing structures, which are people. So
Okay, which makes perfect sense, right?
it
Because
does.
the way hierarchy usually works is so linear, and there's like this, it's very segmented, so you have like marketing and finance and, I don't know, projects and production operations, etc. And then it's so like linear, this guy has his own like metrics, and he puts it down to the team, and then from managers to operational team, etc., etc. And it's so linear, and what you're talking to me is like perfect. We live in a systemic world. The whole ecosystem actually is all systemic. And
We do have some of that connectivity, though. I mean, that need for the larger organism to
of course,
give purpose to the smaller organisms, because otherwise you have anarchy. You don't have an
yeah,
organization
yeah,
anymore. You just have anarchy.
exactly.
But within the context of that, I mean, there's a lot of autonomy as well. There's an assumption that you have a purpose, you have accountabilities, you're accountable to your customer, you're accountable to your teammates, you're accountable to the rest of the organization, and those accountabilities are defined. And and we hold one another accountable for fulfilling those accountabilities and meeting that purpose, and delivering on promises. If you said you're going to have something by Thursday and you don't, I can call you on it, kind of thing. So,
Yeah, that's good.
but I'm going to call you on it because you owed that to me, and not, it wasn't just my manager, kind of thing, saying. So a lot of these things tend to be very real.
Okay, and how does that's really mind blowing. For me, it makes perfect sense. We are adults. We have like a global purpose. Now it's work. Each one grabs their own like piece of the pie with their own like knowledge and skill set. And how does, like, I don't know, goals and budget work for the company? Who decides those stuff?
We decided collectively. I mean,
Okay.
we have a controller,
But
but
is
I
there
mean,
something like, like a voting system or something, like to not become, oh, I don't want like $1 million in budget. I want $1.2 million. I don't know. Is there something like that, like a voting system or anything that makes it easier instead of like this collective?
so we have decision processes, right? So
Okay.
the assumption is, each one of us has the authority to make decisions within our roles.
Okay.
But we have to make those decisions in the context of the organization, which means you need to ask advice. You need to seek advice from others on whether it's a wise decision or not. So we don't have budgets in the same way. We don't have like team budgets and stuff like that. We have an organizational budget because the bank tells us we have to. A lot of
Okay.
organizations, a lot of self-managing organizations don't bother with budgeting. They manage in a much looser way. We haven't got there yet. We're still
Okay.
that ice is a little too thin for us yet. But
But
there are organizations that or they work on like a rolling adjustable budget. So
but that although I asked, I think it makes sense when you don't have like a specific budget or like a goal, whatever, because sometimes you're just like time restraining your objectives as an organization. But actually, the final objective is to have like a long lasting or everlasting, if possible, organization, so it doesn't matter if you're going to overspend the budget this year, if next year you get like more result than you expected and all this. So I think it makes perfect sense, because you have a much more like long-term view of whatever you need to do, instead of this like short-term vision, like this year we need to spend this much and get this much money from customers and all this, you know.
Well, the flip side of it is that there's when things don't go well, there's a real transparency. So, for example, a year ago when COVID hit, and all our clients said, "You can't come in," that cut off a lot of our revenue because we can only bill when we install. So all of
Okay.
a sudden, our revenue took a big dip. And as an organization, we got together and we agreed that each of us would give up a portion of our salary for a period of time. But
Wow.
it was up to each one of us to decide how much we wanted to give up.
Cool.
And by doing that, nobody had to be let go, because that was kind of the alternative, is right? Because a big
Yep.
part of our cost is labor. So in order for nobody to be let go, many of us opted to, and we wouldn't have been able to do that if we didn't have the visibility into, okay, this is the budget situation. George, our controller, laid it all out and said, okay, this is what's happening. This is what we've got in the bank. This is what's going to happen over the next couple of months if we don't change something. And so it's sort of like, okay, this is how far we are to our goal. And then if you wanted to up the amount you wanted to forego of your salary, you could do that. And so now what's happened is 2020 actually turned out to be a really good year for us, because some of our clients were desperately trying to get stuff done so they could cope with COVID. And so now those of us who gave up our salary are getting some of that back. So,
Wow.
but it's all transparent. I mean, anybody can go and find out what the story is of the budget, where we stand. Anybody can express concerns that, hey, I don't think that this expenditure is wise. We've had guys in the warehouse saying, we're not shipping a lot of stuff right now, so I'm a little concerned about revenue. They're
Wow.
seeing what they're seeing. They're seeing those indicators and using that to translate into, hey, I'm concerned about the state of the business.
Wow.
And we take them seriously. I mean, that's a serious perspective.
Wow.
So it's answered seriously.
Well, that's amazing. And you mentioned the word that I was thinking about, which is transparency. It must be like a new level of transparency inside the company. I've never been in an organization or working with any of my clients that has like this level of clarity. And one of the worst things for people who used to work on big corporations like you and me, one of the things that I hated the most was like, oh, you know what? Like this year, we're starting the year. Oh, three people are need to get like let go. We're going to like drop some of those travels and all this, and we had no idea why. Is it
Yeah.
cost? Is it like sales that is having a problem? Who is there? How can we help? You have no action. You're simply like a passive element inside this whole structure.
Yeah.
And what you're telling me is like the flip side of it. You're like an active part of an organism, just like you mentioned.
Yeah. And it gives you the opportunity, talking about co-creating and innovation, it gives you the opportunity to tap into the entrepreneurial spirit of the organization, and to say, are there any other ideas out there for how we can deal with the situation?
Wow.
And it's astounding where those ideas come from. I mean, we do internal workshops, and I'm always amazed at the ideas that come forth and where they come from, and the people you think, that person's really quiet, and they're doing basically an administrative role. So you think they're kind of just
Yeah.
putting the boxes in line, and then they come up with this insight. It's like, wow, that's
Yeah.
really cool. Nobody else came up with that. So
Yeah.
you never know where you're going to find these things. So we want to tap everybody.
Exactly. So I just added a link to a video here in the comments for our audience. and it's from a video of Steve Jobs talking about Apple's culture. And he says, when you have a very innovative culture, you cannot be run by hierarchy, but by ideas. The best ideas need to win. And you never know who has the best ideas. If we were expecting like the top of the class from Einstein to have like the relativity theory, we will never get Einstein. So you never know who is inside the room, and
Yeah.
how can they be a part of it, and how they can propose ideas, and sometimes they're like a Picasso waiting for their their turn.
Yeah, exactly.
And do you feel like, Chris? I know you're in a great spot over there. You when you talk about the company, you kind of like love it. But can you imagine yourself like going back to a very traditional, like hierarchical organization? Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm sweating thinking about it. No, although I've been really fortunate in my career is that I've always had a fair bit of autonomy in how I activated my job.
Okay.
So I've always been a little bit lucky in that respect. I mean, one of the worst things for me is being micromanaged.
Okay.
That's like that one I just can't tolerate for more than about
I think
12
that's a
seconds.
personality trait from everybody that works with innovation, right? We
Could
never like.
be, could be, but no, I mean, what would be interesting for me is if I were to go into, for whatever reason I had to part ways with ET Group and go find myself somewhere else. What would be interesting is sneaking some of the ideas in. And there are
Okay.
ways you can do it. I mean,
Yeah.
there are people who have said, try these kind of low impact or high impact, but sort of low distortion kind of activities where you can kind of bring them in. They don't mess with the status quo too much, but they get people thinking in a different way.
Okay.
They let more people's voices be heard. So they're a little bit subversive, but you're not totally overturning the apple cart.
Cool.
So
Cool.
that would be what I'd want to do is just kind of sneak some of that stuff in. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but I think I've been like in a kind of like entrepreneurial journey for the past 6 or 7 years, and sometimes even when I'm inside a customer that I need to like deliver a project and all this, sometimes there's so much bureaucracy and all this
mm,
stuff, and those politics inside the company that I need to go through to manage to deliver my projects, as even as a consultant or whatever. And I'm like, oh my god, how can I go back to that? I think it's impossible, man.
yeah, yeah, I hear you.
Yeah,
I hear you.
it's crazy. It's crazy, but it's amazing, man. I would love to, experience some of this sometime, and I believe our audience is like, if they're like me, we're in shock because everything that I really believe that can make a difference inside the company is what you're telling me. Understanding the company as an organism, having like adult conversation all the time, listening sincerely, and having full transparency. Those are all amazing, amazing stuff. It's
Yep.
I'm really impacted.
It's a lot of really amazing thinking and a lot of amazing approaches. But the funny thing is when you're in the middle of it, it seems so common sense. It doesn't
It's
seem like you're doing anything weird. It's
I
like
can
it
imagine.
just seems very natural.
Okay, I can imagine.
So
Because actually, as you mentioned, your party example was perfect. That's basically your day-to-day stuff. Only like, I don't know, organizations, prisons, and and the army have like those hierarchy and stuff.
yep, those are what we
And
call
it's cool.
amber organizations.
Yeah, exactly,
So
exactly.
we're what you call a teal organization. So which
Yeah,
is a whole other topic. So
yeah, that's amazing. Okay, Chris, we're getting to our final minutes. Thank
mhm.
you very much for the conversation. It was amazing. It's great to see like this different perspective. Holacracy is the first time that I ever spoke with someone who works in an environment like that. I was at Las Vegas in 2015 when Zappos was doing this transition to Holacracy. So they were still like trying to understand it, and there were so many things not working. So I couldn't really get a sense of how this was going to end up with. And now listen to you, it makes perfect sense. I enjoyed so much the conversation, and I'm really glad that you mentioned so much the power of ethnographical research, because it's something I believe so much, and everybody that is listening to us, this program has the idea to understand innovation from cross-cultural perspectives. And what we're actually listening Chris talk about in Canada is the same thing we're trying to do here in Brazil, Latin America with our customers, in Asia with other customers that we have over there, and many other companies that really understood the power of listening to customers and being actually customer centric are going to benefit from it, and thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. It's been a lot of fun.
Okay. Thank you. See you. Have a great time at ET Group. Thank you for all the audience, and I'll see you in the next episode. In 2 weeks from now, we will be interviewing another friend of mine from France. So we're kind of like moving from North America into Europe. Then there's France and UK and all this countries coming by through Innovation Exchange. Thank you very much for the audience.